Hey, Charles, what are projects related to real world payments? Will Midnight be a possible option or Jed? Keep it up. So, Midnight is a huge step forward because what Midnight does is it corrects a very real problem that all blockchains have at the moment, which is blockchains can't keep a secret. It's a very fundamental problem. And by design, they can't keep a secret. The whole point of a blockchain is to be globally accessible, transparent, auditable, and immutable. So they create a version of history, and everybody gets that same version of history. It's called a trusted bulletin board, use a cryptographic term. That's awesome. And it's super useful for certificate authorities, timestamping, money systems, public voting systems, you name it. There's 1,000 use cases that a trusted bulletin board has. And anybody who says that that's not useful to society, either they don't know how society works or they're willfully lying to you. Okay, so that's hugely important. And the scope of those things is de minimis compared to the scope of things where you need to keep a secret in order for commerce to work appropriately. Almost every single commercial transaction and government transaction and academic transaction and medical transaction we have involves a private part and a public part. Basic things. For example, you go and withdraw some funds from your ATM. And you say to yourself, oh, okay, why does that matter? Well, there's laws in place about how that bank has to preserve and protect those records for the regulator, but also keep them secret. Normally speaking, a bank in the world can't just go out and say, hey, John Smith just withdrew $300 from the ATM. Oh, by the way, he's right next to the red light district. Don't know what he's doing. They can't do that. There's laws against these types of things. So that's the private component of it. They can't go in a general sense do this. So if you want to decentralize these systems, you have to ask yourself, how do you map that business logic onto a system that by default has to be open, transparent, and auditable by everybody? It means you have to introduce a completely new primitive, a programmable private smart contract. Once you have that, then you have a private state and a public state. You can model your business logic. You get all the properties of blockchain technology, the auditability, the irreversibility, the time stamping, all these types of things. But you can scope those properties to the disclosure regime that you have. So the general public, for example, can't audit. However, you can assign an auditor, and that is programmatic, meaning that you can't change it. It's like a cryptographic commitment. It's a very powerful primitive because you get the best of both worlds. You get privacy, but auditability. That's rare, and that's a unique thing. The other thing is that you get the coordination function that blockchains have. So blockchains are super connectors. They're very good at bringing many different business logics together who don't necessarily like or trust each other or can't work together for a variety of geopolitical reasons or economic reasons or brand and reputation reasons, for example. It also allows you to introduce a new category of applications. We call them ACE applications, freedom of association, commerce, and expression. So here's a great example. University politics. A lot of universities, the rank and file people at the universities do not agree with how insane and woke some of the politics are getting, just maddeningly crazy. But why do they publicly support it? Why do they go up and say, oh, this is a good idea? Because they're worried that if they publicly oppose it, their career will be destroyed. There's fear inside the organization. What if you had anonymous voting systems that could prove membership and say you are a professor, you are an employee of that institution, that university, or that corporation, but you also could vote without fear of people knowing who you are? That's an example of a selective disclosure regime in that the system can self-verify that you are a member, but cannot actually put and say this was Charles Hoskinson or Jimmy or whatever. Then suddenly you could take a poll and find out that 70% of your faculty are actually against this nonsense. You just don't know which 70% it is. It's a major improvement in the system, and it allows you to start converging to truth. Because for us to be able to work together and trust each other, we have to be able to move between public to private and back but we have to preserve some capabilities as we do that. In the current systems we have that are non-blockchain based, they usually require a great degree of trust in a centralized institution. Very basic concepts like, how do you know if there's a private state that somebody didn't come in and change a few things and say everything's okay? Our vote counting systems are a great example of that. We had just had the 2020 election. Half of America says it was fraud. Okay. And the other half says, oh, best election in human history. There's not a single vote was fraudulent. Everything's perfect. Well, the problem is that no outside party has the ability to audit that election. I can't check the votes. So we have to trust the institution to check the vote. So it's real easy to pin the tail on the donkey and say that's an evil or bad institution. Well, what if the institution was a blockchain? By design, it can't lie. So you can verify an audit and say, yes, it's a fair election, but you don't have to reveal that Charles Hoskinson voted this way and Atlas voted this way and Bob voted that way. It's a very powerful capability. And this is an example of what Midnight was built for, was to enable these types of use cases. So it used to be blockchains can't keep a secret. Now it's blockchains can keep a secret, and that's good for you, and that's good for society as a whole. It's good for freedom. It's good for commerce, and it's the next natural evolution. It's the single biggest evolution that we have outside of governance improvements in the ecosystem. Now, the good news is that Cardano is not compromising. We're getting both. We're getting all the governance improvements, and we're getting also the privacy improvements, which puts us light years ahead of the industry as a whole. If you are in a blockchain ecosystem, and the big guys in that ecosystem are saying scalability, 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 transaction cost, transaction cost, transaction cost, get out, because they're completely bereft of real life use cases and ideas. Scalability will come, and it's a commoditized thing. We know how to do it as an industry. We know fundamental sets of technologies that are required to do it. And there's a smart cow effect in that whoever solves these types of problems, it's ubiquitously useful to everybody, and we can take it and bring it in within 18, 24 months. And so once that differentiator is closed, what differentiates you from every other ecosystem that also has low transaction scalability and these types of things? Nothing differentiates you. So what you need are true differentiators that you can't replicate just by knowing the protocol. Anybody can copy paste the US Constitution. You can't copy paste the US government. Anybody can copy paste a governing structure. They can't copy paste the people who occupy that governing structure. So having baseline capabilities like freedom preservation systems, good governance structures, good institutions, those are competitive, non-replicatable capabilities in a system that make it stronger, more resilient, the decision-making more efficient and effective, and ultimately they allow the system to grow and propagate and self-reinforce and strengthen. And that's what carries you through. And you'll notice the two biggest areas of research we have as an ecosystem are on the Midnight side, and the entire house of affairs there, partner chains, all the Halo 2 stuff. It's just thousands of things that go into that. It's a super complicated thing. And Voltaire, the age of Voltaire, huge house of stuff going there. Now, internet land, people have difficulty understanding nuances. Yes, there's scalability research going on. There is Mithril and Hydra and Ouroboros Laos and all this other stuff, Plutus improvements and network improvements and et cetera, et cetera. It's all happening. Great. But the two big differentiators, the on-chain governance, Ethereum is not touching and will not touch because the founder doesn't want to do it. And Bitcoin can't touch. So that's a huge differentiator. And it's a massive differentiator between us and them. And then on the Midnight side, we've embraced the best technology for it. But I think we have the best approach for how to pull all these different pieces together. And it's evolving very rapidly, as you guys can see. So it's not like a horizontal thing. 5 years we'll have this. It's actually already people are running private smart contracts on the test net, and that test net's getting very evolved very quickly. It's one of our fastest moving teams we've ever put together.